I wonder if you're like most people. Most people think guarding your heart means protecting your feelings. You don't want to get hurt. You guard against trusting the wrong people. You don't let your emotions get wounded. Now, of course, those things matter, but Proverbs is pointing to something much deeper. When Scripture says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs chapter 4:23. It is making a remarkable claim. Not merely that your heart affects your life, but that your entire life flows from what is happening inside you. This means your relationships, your habits, your decisions, your emotional reactions, your fears, your hopes, and your character. Everything flows downstream from the condition of the heart. And that raises an important question. What exactly is meant by the heart? Well, you need to realize that the heart is more than emotion. Today we often use the word heart to mean feelings. But in the ancient Hebrew understanding, the heart was much larger than emotion. The heart referred to the center of the person, the place, the center, where perception, desire, attention, thought, motivation, and will come all together. The heart was the organizing center of life. So what does this look like in modern language? We might say the heart is where you learn what matters. It tells you what is worth pursuing, what is worth fearing, what is worth loving, and what is worth trusting. And because of that, the heart becomes the source of behaviors. People do not simply act. They act from somewhere. They live from what they love. They pursue what they value. They defend what they fear. They move toward what captures their attention. Everything essentially flows from the heart, your heart. And the fallen world understands this. Interestingly, modern culture understands this principle very well, because we have entire industries that are competing for your attention. They come in the form of social media, advertising, entertainment, and politics, in the news. Why? Why is this happening? Because attention eventually becomes desire, and desire eventually becomes action, and action eventually becomes habit. Habit eventually becomes character. The fallen world is constantly trying to shape your heart. Not usually through direct commands, but through repeated exposure and repeated attention, repeatedly activating your emotional states. And this happens when you repeat narratives. What you repeatedly attend to begins shaping what feels normal. And eventually, what feels normal starts shaping how you live and the choices that you make. Let's look at neuroscience and the power of attention. This is where neuroscience becomes fascinating. Researchers have discovered that attention is not passive. Attention literally helps shape your brain. Repeated focus on anything strengthens neural pathways. Repeated experiences reinforce whatever expectations you have, whether those are realistic or even unrealistic. Repeated emotional responses strengthen certain circuits. The brain gradually becomes efficient at whatever it repeatedly practices. If a person continually rehearses fear, that brain becomes better at fear. If a person continually rehearses outrage, that person's brain becomes better at outrage. If a person continually rehearses comparison, you get it, the brain becomes better at comparison. The brain learns what it practices, which is perfectly normal for the brain. It is on your side. If you practice it, it deems it important. This is one reason Proverbs emphasizes guarding the heart, because whatever repeatedly gains access to the inner world eventually influences the whole person. Let's look at why guarding is necessary. Notice that Proverbs does not say, observe your heart, or study your heart, or analyze your heart. It says, guard your heart. Guarding implies protection. It implies being discerning between what is good, what is bad. It involves intentionality and boundaries. Something valuable is being protected from something that is harmful. This is important because the fallen world constantly trains people toward urgency, fear, pride, envy, resentment, lust, distraction, and self-centeredness. And these influences rarely arrive announcing themselves. They arrive disguised as what? Normal. Normal entertainment, normal outrage, normal distraction, normal comparison, normal self-protection. Over time, these influences can become internalized. They can and they do. And what enters repeatedly eventually shapes perception. Psychology and the formation of the inner world is something we need to consider next. Many emotional patterns begin as adaptations. When you were a child, you learned how to survive. You did this through learning how to gain approval, learning how to avoid rejection, and learning how to reduce fear. These adaptations often become, and they do, when repeated enough, they become automatic. You may resort to people-pleasing, perfectionism, control, withdrawal, caretaking, defensiveness. At one point, these strategies certainly served a protective function, especially when you were a child and you really had few other choices. But over time, these defenses and these patterns begin to obscure your authentic self. You become a person that's increasingly disconnected from who you truly are, not because you are intentionally dishonest, but because old survival patterns have become automatic. This is why people sometimes say, I don't even know who I am anymore. Or a more common one is, I have imposter syndrome. The defenses that once protected you have begun to isolate you. Jesus repeatedly focused on the heart, not just behavior, not appearances, the heart. Again and again, he challenged people who looked righteous externally, but whose inner lives were disordered. Because behaviors can be managed for a while. Sure they can. Everyone puts their best step forward when they have to. But eventually the heart reveals itself. Jesus says, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. That's Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. What fills the heart eventually emerges in life. Not always immediately, but you can be sure inevitably it shows up. This is where Christian transformation becomes unique. Christianity is not simply behavior management. It is not merely trying harder. It is not moral performance. It is the gradual reordering of the inner person. The heart begins loving different things, valuing different things, trusting different things. The mind begins seeing very differently. The person becomes less controlled by fear. You, the person, becomes less controlled by needing approval, less controlled by your impulses, less controlled by the pressures of this fallen world. And you become more oriented toward truth, towards wisdom, and ultimately toward Christ. This is why Scripture repeatedly calls believers to renew their minds. Because what captures attention eventually shapes the heart. And what shapes the heart eventually shapes your life. So what does it mean to guard your heart today? It means paying attention to what is training your attention. What voices are disciplining you? What stories are shaping your imagination? What fears are being rehearsed? What habits are becoming normal for you? What patterns are you practicing every day? Because formation is happening whether you choose it or not. You are being shaped. It's not a matter of whether you're being shaped. You are. What you need to be concerned is, by what? The wisdom of Proverbs is remarkably relevant today. Above all else, guard your heart. Because your heart is not merely where you feel, it is where you learn what to love, what to trust, what to fear, what to pursue, and who you want to become. Neuroscience helps us understand how repeated attention shapes your brain. Psychology helps us understand how patterns become automatic. But Scripture reminds us why this truly matters. Because everything flows from the heart. And what you allow to shape your inner world today will influence the person you become tomorrow. So you may ask yourself, how am I doing? But a better question might be, what is shaping my heart? And is it leading me closer to truth, wisdom, and Christ, or further away?